we're likely to pay massive costs trying to cut our own very modest emissions, and then we're the cost of having to adapt anyway, because nothing we do is going to make any difference. Our chief scientist has said that. Nothing we do in Australia will make any difference. Separate argument for whether we should do anything, but we'll wear the cost of cutting our own emissions and the cost of adapting, because we'll have to adapt.
But you see, when I would make that kind of point in the House of Lords, Lord Deben or someone like that would stand up and say, no, you don't understand. We're setting an example to the world. We're a shining city on the hill, and the Chinese are watching what we're doing and they're going to emulate it. Well, I mean, if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Nobody is in China or India or America or Russia is going to say, oh my goodness, the Brits or the Australians have committed to cut their carbon emissions. We better follow suit. You're quite right. If we spend a fortune impoverishing ourselves, spoiling our environment, doing really damaging things to our environment by covering in solar panels and wind turbines and cluttering up the North Sea with concrete structures and all this kind of thing. If we do all that and then find we've got global warming anyway, because nobody else is doing anything, what's the point? Why are we, we're still going to have to pay the cost of adapting to it. And yes, there will be some adaptation needed to sea level rise, to maybe more flooding in places. We're going to have to pay that anyway. Why don't we just pay that cost rather than the other cost as well?
Now, to the cynics who will want to jump at you and me, can I say at this point, as a farmer deeply invested in the whole business of research and exports and feeding the world's population, that's an area that I've always been deeply involved in. I actually think, call it the precautionary principle if you like, we ought to be looking for alternatives. We ought to be multiplying our sources of energy. We are too dependent on oil to feed ourselves. Half the world's global crop production, which is contributing to that incredible reduction in poverty around the world, is dependent on fossil fuels, gas, essentially, for fertilizer production.
Yeah.
The amount of diesel used on our moderate family-sized operation in Australia, something like 30 internal combustion engines on one farm operation, is absolutely massive. Peak oil used to be something we worried about enormously. Now we've pushed it off. We need to remember, I think, that some of those resources, are not limitless. And so the technology search for better alternatives seems to me to be quite desirable, but it ought to be done in a positive way.
Yes, I agree with that, with the proviso that the shale gas revolution really has changed our understanding of how much gas there is in the world. 20 years ago, you could still argue that we're about to run out of gas. You cannot argue that now. We now get gas out of the source rock rather than just the permeable sandstones where it was accumulating before. So we've got centuries of gas to call on. So in terms of keeping the fertilizer industry supplied with gas, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Britain's got fantastic shale gas reserves if it chooses to exploit them, which at the moment it's not doing. So we've got more time than we thought we had to replace these fossil fuels. But you're quite right. It would be nice to have a system that didn't produce any carbon dioxide and that was ready to replace any of these things if they did begin to run out. So how do we do that? Well, we invest in research and development. We develop new technologies like fusion, but above all, cheaper forms of nuclear power, because the really foolish thing we've done is drive up the price of nuclear power with over-regulation to the point where we basically can't afford to build these reactors. We've not allowed that technology to drive down its costs through learning by doing. And if we could do that, it would make all the difference.